And we decided that we wanted to depart from normalcy essentially and live a different lifestyle and put into practice a lot of the ideas that we had around nutrition in terms of farming in a different way, also separating man and woman and kind of traditional Christian values there. Some of the farmers would also very much be afraid of bacteria as well. Using all this soap on the milk container, on the tubes that the milk goes through, all the machinery, every surface, wiping it down with these hardcore detergents. And there's always going to be some residue that's left over and actually goes into the milk. So I've tried milk from probably 500 farms at this point over the last 3-4 years, especially my friends which are more in tune with certain details. They can really tell suddenly that they drink some milk and they don't feel good drinking it. And it's not the milk, but it's the detergent that was used, and the residue has unfortunately leached into the milk itself. Then there's a second principle, which would be to say the more raw or unpasteurized the diet is, the more healthful that it is. The mind yearns for the shadow, essentially. When you hang out with people that are only similar to you, you can't really give people what they need very much, because what they need is not what you produce by yourself. Prior to meeting my friends and coming together and kind of building the mini village, let's say, that we have, essentially I was only hanging out with a lot of business people. And what happens there is that it just doubles down on what your strengths are, but also doubles down on your weaknesses. And there's no one that can cater to what you need. Of course, you always need both things, right? That's the wholesomeness that the mind wants to obtain, is a balance of your shadow and your consciousness. And in order to get the shadow, the only way is to get it externally from other people. You cannot produce those things by yourself.
Being real with you, if I weren't married with a baby and being very geo-tethered to my town in Massachusetts, I would ask if I could join up with you guys and start traveling
Absolutely.
with you
I think
guys.
you would fit right in.
I think I would, but unfortunately, I'm not. If you caught me 5 years ago, that's where I was at. I was living in a van, traveling, looking for community to be part of. I was part of a Buddhist community for a long time. David Goggins would be another example, maybe, of an ENTJ.
He's an ISTP, actually. It's funny that you bring him up, which is also someone that really yearns for comfort. And he produces none of the comfort. He has no sense of coziness, but he really wants that coziness. And you just look at him and you say, relax, just chill. Let's stay still, you know? And it's not the impression you get, right? He's go, 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 nonstop. Who's going to carry the boats? Who's going to carry the logs? And it's like, well, who's going to carry David? You know, it's actually, he needs to slow down and be comfortable and chill. And he would really appreciate having that in his life.
Yeah, the thing is, the camera is exposing for the windows behind me, but fuck it. Honestly, man, it's a $2,000 camera, and sometimes I feel like the iPhone exposes better than these $2,000 cameras. You know what I mean?
The iPhone's crazy. It really can adjust to so many different focus points. Almost, it's incredible. It has its own.
It is. It's got. It's definitely the best plug and play camera that you can get, where you can just point it at a scene and trust that it will expose it, better than any other device, including my multi-$1,000 Sony cameras, which I have 3 of now.
Yeah.
But what can you do, So where are you right now,
Now
Oscar?
I'm in Lisbon, in Portugal at the moment. I'm with John, the guys that you also spoke to before,
You with all of those guys?
Just hanging out here.
That's awesome. So, bro, can we start with, like, what is that community that you live in? Who are those guys? What do you guys do? It's so intriguing and mysterious to me. So just as a backup, Oscar lives with these 3 other guys who at one point signed up for a 3-hour chat with me, essentially. And that's when I met Oscar very briefly. But what's the story with you guys? You're part of a commune?
Yes, essentially we came together through interest in nutrition. So that's how it started. We all were, let's say, attracted to these interesting ideas about nutrition, primarily around raw food, especially raw animal products, which I guess we'll talk more about later. So we were attracted to each other through this nutrition kind of community, and through meeting in person, that's what brought us together. But then we kind of stayed together as friends, and we brought in, let's say, more kind of philosophical and religious components, which is how we kind of stayed together as friends. And so we decided together that we wanted to live away from the city. Some of my friends have a lot of money from various businesses that they ran and things like that. And we decided that we wanted to depart from normalcy, essentially, and live, let's say, a different lifestyle and put into practice a lot of the ideas that we had around also nutrition in terms of farming and experimenting with farming in a different way, in a more kind of natural, old school style of farming, but also practicing living like a different kind of philosophy, one of almost going back to a kind of childlike state there of having a lot of fun, and also some religious components there and traditions to it as well of, separating man and woman, and some kind of traditional Christian values there.
Wow, man. Yeah, that last point is very interesting because I've studied communal living before, and I've lived in specifically Buddhist communes, which are essentially monasteries. Buddhist communes don't have this problem, but most communes, I learned, break apart because of sexual
Mm-hmm.
misconduct. So essentially, you can get people together, give them a philosophy of life, and they will go along with it until at some point, two people have sex, someone gets pissed off, or they get pissed off at each other, and then it creates
Mm-hmm.
divisiveness. So I think one of the keys to what you guys are doing is probably the mores you have around sexuality. That's super
Yeah,
interesting.
what we observed was we were doing these meetings where we would bring people who were interested in, let's say, health, primal health, and eating raw animal products, and just that whole kind of natural nutrition style. And we brought people together, and of course, predominantly it was men that were interested in that, right? But there would always be a handful of women at the meetings that we did. But what we observed was that it really guys are very weak basically around women, and I'm not excluding myself from that, especially more so in the past. And when you put a woman in the room with a bunch of guys, they start to behave very, very differently there, and it's very funny to observe. So, yeah.
Does the guy with the biggest jaw ever always win?
I think, well, actually, comparing myself to my friends, I'm one of the better ones, but it's not perfect at all. But
No, no, you got a good skull on you, man, for sure. Um, that's amazing. Tell me about the forum where you guys had originally met online. What was the subject matter of that forum? You said nutrition, but was it specifically a kind of like raw food nutrition that you guys were interested
Yeah,
in?
so a lot of the ideas come from you could say a doctor, or like an alternative doctor who was more prevalent in the early 2000s. He died in 2013, and he basically was experimenting and doing a lot of the research around the effects of a raw animal based diet. So not just raw juices and some raw fruits and things, but also he was the first person to really emphasize raw meat as a way of healing the body, essentially through nutrition. And so a lot of
Who
his
was
name was
that?
Arjunus von der Planets. His real name was John Swiggett, but then he chose like a pseudonym there. And yeah, he had a lot of the ideas. He wrote a couple of books around that, very, very interesting. And that's kind of what brought us together. His ideas are very, very polarizing. And yeah, he kind of created almost a mini cult-like following on the internet. And so when we
Hmm.
came together, it was around these ideas. But what we saw was that nutrition isn't enough of a philosophy really to stay together. As it can only bring you so far, right? A kind of common interest in food, but life is about so
Yeah,
much more than food. And what we found
yeah.
was partly why we were attracted to the ideas of Arjunus, who was promoting, raw animal products, rather than fearing bacteria, embracing bacteria, these kinds of principles. We were attracted to those ideas because they kind of liberate you, and they give you an ease in the world, right? If suddenly you realize that there's nothing to be concerned about with bacteria, like whatsoever, even more, let's say, scary things for people like parasites and things like that. Once you understand that there's nothing to be concerned about whatsoever, it really can liberate you. And that's kind of what we were attracted to, that mental ease that it gives you. However, what we saw was
Yeah.
that it can also make people very neurotic, which was one of the things that is very unattractive about the modern world for me. Let's say people are extremely scared and neurotic, and this is going to kill you, and this is going to kill you, and stuff like that. And so, in the same way that people have that in the normal world, let's say, people, even when they apply the primal, let's say, philosophy, or the primal, when they start to get into primal nutrition, they can also get very neurotic about it, and that's what people do, right? And it's almost exactly like the vegans, and this is the way, and you have to do this. You can also get like that even when you're doing, let's say, a raw animal based diet. So that's where we kind of
Yeah.
departed a bit from the teachings of Arjunus, and we kind of twisted it for our own, how we like it, essentially, by making it more practical, but also adding in some philosophy there, and kind of embracing let's say, less neuroticism, and just, yeah, more applying it as we saw it, which was also excuse me, implementing some of, let's say, Hippocrates philosophies as well, which is the original, who they consider the father of Western medicine. what we found very interesting
Right.
was to look at his kinds of quotes, and you see he says things like the best doctors are philosophers, and people
Hmm.
have kind of forgotten that, and we were very attracted to that kind of philosophy of saying, there's a non-physical part to health and a wholesome good life, and we kind of departed a bit there ourselves, and what we're interested in is more a wholesome picture of health that includes integrating death, essentially, is what it is, and not being afraid of dying, and accepting death, and there you can go in and out of being very strict with something, but also eating cake on your friend's birthday and enjoying a pizza and things like that. Not that we do those things too often, but you can embrace those ideas instead of being very afraid of it, as people they get very rigid and, oh, I have to eat, if you're a raw vegan or whatever, they get very strict about those things, and we're really are not attracted to that. So yeah, we kind of took Arginus's teachings as a big source of inspiration, also Hippocrates as well, and then we kind of made it very practical for ourselves, and also integrated some philosophy to it there. And that for me is a very wholesome picture of health that gives people a good life.
Yeah. What do you think are some of Hippocrates' big ideas that people don't really know about? I don't ever remember hearing anyone quote
Mm-hmm.
Hippocrates in all of my health content consumption over the past 13
Yeah,
years.
it's amazing. You would just you can type in on Google, anyone can do this, Hippocrates quotes, and you're like, this is crazy, like he says things, let thy food be thy medicine. And there's one which is if you don't mind, I'll just quickly Google it. It's worth it.
Does he advocate raw foods and, as you described it, embracing bacteria?
Certainly, if you apply his quotes and the things he says, that's kind of where it would lead you, right? So he says things like, this is one in particular that I found very interesting, which is, it's more important to know what sort of person has a disease than to know what sort of disease a person has, right? So what that does, essentially, that kind of quote, it brings back power to you as the individual, instead of saying, oh, I've been unlucky, I've been stricken with bacteria 75, 52, and this is my fate, and now I'm going to die, and things like that. Rather than that, you can say, well, as it says, right, what are your habits? What led you to even get into the state that you're in now? And it kind of empowers the individual there, which is something that is philosophy that we like to apply. So those kinds of quotes. But I find it so fascinating that this was the original, proposition of Western medicine: is let thy food be thy medicine. And it's gone so far away from that, right? If you go on the CDC website or whatever, it's not that whatsoever. So it's a very interesting contrast to see, and also try and understand how we got lost from that proposition along the way. I think some of the main causes would be the main events, let's say, in history, would be around, with pasteurization, for example, in the 1900s, when that started, and with Louis Pasteur and things like that. And they started to pasteurize all the dairy products, and then promoting the idea that bacteria is the cause of disease, right? Whereas someone like Hippocrates, if you apply his quotes, or Arginus, they would say the bacteria doesn't cause the disease, rather it's actually part of the solution. So yeah, those were some of the events in the history that were interesting.
My baby was just born in Boston at Brigham and Women Hospital, and Brigham and Women Hospital is associated with the Harvard Medical School. And the road that leads right up to the front door of the grand Harvard Medical School building, which is called Gordon Hall, it's this amazing classical architecture stone building. It's magnificent. The road leading up to it is Louis Pasteur Drive.
I would turn around immediately.
So it's very symbolic, though, that Louis Pasteur literally leads us into the preeminent modern medicine academy,
Yeah,
Harvard
yeah,
Medical
yeah,
School.
yeah.
What could be more symbolic of where we're at?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I experienced it myself with it's a story that I had where I essentially started to develop appendicitis, and I was very afraid at the time, and extreme pain in my stomach, and at the time I just started to get into, let's say, the alternative perspective about health, but I was still early in my journey, and I hadn't been gone all the way with it yet, essentially, and I started to have this significant pain, and I said, I don't want to go to hospital, I'm going to wait. And I think on day 2, the pain started to become really severe. And I said, okay, well, I'm going to go to the hospital because I'm going to entertain the doctor's ideas. And, but I'll fix it myself, And just as relates to what you're saying here, because as I was driving to the hospital at the time, I'd been living, very rurally for the last 4 or 5 months or 6 months. And as I was driving to the hospital, it's that kind of Louis Pasteur lane that you're talking about. I see this big big building in the background, and there's a thunderstorm happening coincidentally at the same time, and it just looks like some kind of villain's lair that I'm driving towards. And and essentially in the hospital, it doesn't feel like you're getting healthier, and it feels like I was actually going to die the longer I stayed there. And in the end, I decided to leave there, and I managed to fix the problem without any kind of interventions there. But that was relating to what you said there about the Louis Pasteur drive.
Yeah, no doubt. Hospitals are definitely places where you have to take what you want and leave the rest.
Mm-hmm.
You definitely have to have a skeptical, cynical attitude when you're staying in a hospital, getting treated for something. I think modern surgeries can be fantastic, but I think that a lot of times it's the in-between stuff that they push on you. So, for example, my daughter was just born, and my wife had to be induced into labor. And they did this mechanical induction where they used a balloon to begin to open up her cervix because she wasn't going into labor naturally, and she was well past her due date. I think mechanical interventions like that are very interesting. It worked because as soon as they opened up her cervix a little bit mechanically, she went into labor and then gave birth less than 24 hours later. But then it's, they start pushing pain medicines on you during labor, and they want the baby to take this Hep B vaccine as soon as she's born. And Hep B is not even something the baby will be exposed to unless essentially the parents are having new sexual partners all the time where they might be exposed to Hep B, right? And all sorts of other things they want to kind of sneak in with the good thing that they do.
They can be very aggressive. It seems that way, and it takes a strong mind to be able to resist that. And unfortunately, people get very scared, right? Because it is the predominant authority figure in society, the one that is still very much respected as gospel, essentially, right? Because people doubt the government, people doubt their teachers, people doubt their parents, and they can rebel easily. And they can rebel against the financial systems with crypto, especially. And people have a kind of attitude for ignoring the government. But when it comes to the doctor, it's kind of the last bastion of authority in society that people really struggle to resist and say no. I'm okay. I'm good. I don't need your help. And people really struggle with that one. And that is from the understanding primarily of bacteria there, that people that gives them all of the power essentially there. And if you apply that Hippocrates quote, you can kind of get some of that power back to yourself.
Sure. I think that this is an interesting observation that you guys are sort of on about seeing Western medicine essentially as being built off of this idea that bacteria bad and bacteria must be killed, and antibiotics, are the greatest thing that ever happened to human society. And maybe there's some truth to that, but it also does get to this point that maybe we've gone a little bit too far in our bacteria phobia, and that there's a more nuanced perspective that people should take. I want to circle back to appendicitis. I had appendicitis when I was a freshman in high school in 2004, and had a severe pain, was taken to the hospital, and had my appendix removed. I have no appendix right now. I have a little scar down at my pelvic area. What is the appendix for, in your opinion? And is it actually a storehouse of bacteria, as people assert, or is it really an obsolete organ, as Western medicine will have us believe?
Yeah, it's a good question, right? So there'll be different perspectives. Firstly, there's the doctor's perspective, and that's what I experienced when I went to hospital, where he tells me, "Oh, this is a useless organ, and you don't need this, and we evolved out of it." That's how they see it in Western medicine, and they would say that it's a non-essential organ. And then you would look at someone like Argenis's perspective, where he says it's a library of stored information, whereby if you were to be...
That's my wife. Are you okay,
problem.
hon?
I just have a quick question.
Go ahead. What's up?
Katie Angie's $285
$285?
to send 150 ounces of breast milk.
We'll pay her for it, of course.
Okay, I'll pay her.
Yeah, my wife's friend is sending her some breast milk,
Okay.
and the shipping charge is $285. So she just is checking with me to make sure I'm okay with that. So it's 150 ounces of milk though, which is It's a lot of breast
Did
milk.
you consider raw dairy as an alternative?
Of course I did, but my wife is one of these a little bit on the bacteriophobic side,
Okay.
where she's consumed some of this content online that says, don't be what do they call them, a fundy, that wants to feed their baby raw dairy
Okay.
from
They
a
call it
cow or
funny?
from
I
a
never
goat.
heard of that one.
Yeah, I mean it stands for
Okay.
fundamentalist. Yeah, so it's huge on Reddit. Reddit is hugely anti raw dairy for
Right.
babies. Of course, me, as someone who's been consuming raw dairy for 10 years now, I'm a huge fan of raw dairy. I used to make my own kefir out of raw goat milk. I have a farm not far from here called Gloaming Nubians in Hampstead, New Hampshire, where I get raw goat milk.
Nice.
And another farm in southern New Hampshire called Connolly Farm, where I get raw cow milk, raw cow ice cream,
Excellent.
heavy cream, which is incredible, and other such raw dairy delights. But our baby is small and very delicate looking, and I think my wife is she's scared.
That's completely
But what
understandable. Yeah, you could point out that the dairy that is breast milk, I'm assuming it's some breast milk donation, right? That's what you're saying?
from her friend, it's
Right.
non-pasteurized.
So it is actually raw dairy there. So you would have to try and
Correct.
explain what's the difference essentially, and there you might see some flaws in the reasoning, but that's completely understandable. And people have to be very comfortable throughout the process, and yeah, it's important that they're
Yeah,
happy basically.
for sure. And my wife is very rational, but you're right that in general with these things, it's more of an emotional
Absolutely.
refutation than it is a rational one, isn't it? With most
Yeah,
people.
100%.
What was I going to say? Interestingly, the breast milk. So the hospital that we gave birth at, Brigham and Women, they have a breast milk bank where you can get, if you're not producing, because the woman generally doesn't produce her own breast milk immediately upon giving birth. There's some colostrum
Yeah.
that she makes, but it's kind of light for several days after birth. So they have this breast milk bank, but of course their milk is
They
pasteurized.
pasteurize the breast milk.
So I'm
Yeah.
like, they pasteurize the breast milk at the biggest, most preeminent hospital in Boston. And I don't know how people don't realize that when you heat up a raw dairy product, you're denaturing the proteins in it, and you're essentially turning a medicinal food into a graveyard of bacteria, a graveyard of dead, denatured proteins and dead bacteria that the body actually recognizes as foreign and toxic, and you can actually have an allergic reaction to it. So,
Well, people don't realize because they haven't tried the raw dairy, right? So it's only in the contrast that people will often realize those things.
right. So, what do you think about raw cow or goat milk for babies, infants,
Well,
newborns?
there's what you read, right? So there's like the theoretical, my understanding from theory, which would be that it's completely fine. Essentially, especially goat milk is quite similar to cow milk, to human milk. So it's the
More
more
lean, right?
similar, exactly. Yeah. Uh,
Less fatty, more
Exactly, but
lean.
then there's what I see, right? So my friends have babies and they feed them raw dairy, and they seem like the most healthy, most relaxed, and least annoying to deal with children that are very well nourished. That would be why I would assume is because of the nourishment from the food that they're just very calm and easy to deal with as babies, very easy. So that's what I've seen with my own eyes, right? And that would already be a good reference point for anyone that if they could see a baby that was fed raw dairy versus not, they might see some differences.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the whole argument against raw dairy for babies seems to revolve around these rare extreme cases where there might be some, bacterial infection that occurs. It's like one in, I don't know, 10,000 where this might happen, but then the baby becomes deathly ill. And they use that as the case in point as to why you should never feed your child raw dairy. Is that
Yeah, well,
correct?
they'll use all kinds of arguments, but they can do ridiculous things like a child drowns, but then he drank raw milk earlier in the day, and suddenly the raw milk was the cause of death or something like that. So they can use all kinds of crazy ways to push whatever message or whatever intention that they have there. But yeah, essentially, a lot of that also comes from, well, firstly, you'd have to say that people can also get sick and die when they eat cooked food in a restaurant, and that happens probably one in the same sort of ratios as they were talking about there. So that's the first thing to note.
Sure.
Secondly, from my experience, it's usually that the milk is treated, or the container that they store the milks in, and the tubes that the milk goes through at the farm and things like that. They have to treat those things with so much soap and chemicals by law, not by choice necessarily, although some of the farmers would also very much be afraid of bacteria as well. So when they're using all this soap and very hardcore detergents on the milk container, on the tubes that the milk goes through, all the machinery, every surface, they're wiping it down with these strong detergents. And there's always going to be some residue that's left over and actually goes into the milk. And I've experienced that with my friends where we've tried milk, because I've tried milk from probably 500 farms at this point over the last 3-4 years. And there's always sometimes, especially my friends, which are more in tune with certain details, let's say, they can really tell suddenly that they drink some milk and they don't feel good drinking it. And it's not the milk, but it's the detergent that was used, and the residue has unfortunately leached into the milk itself. And that's very sad. That can cause some problems as well. And so it's not in those instances, it's not the dairy, but rather the detergent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when I do my dishes, I never use dish detergent at all, except unless I have like a Tupperware that has had some fatty or oily thing in it, just to kind of break down the oil off of the plastic. But then I'll rinse it like a billion times. But normally, if I'm eating a piece of meat off of a ceramic plate, I just use hot water and elbow grease with a scrubber.
It suffices.
Because I'm like, I would rather have a little leftover meat residue than I would, what's that detergent that everyone uses? Than I would dish detergent in my system.
But people don't take that perspective, because they don't. It's not something that they process consciously. The idea that some of this is going to leach into your food, and also some of this is actually bad for you. It's not conducive to good health. So yeah, it's something that people get aware of when they start to read about it, and then they can make those changes that you're talking about there. I'd say vinegar is a very good tool, for example, to wash everything with, if not just hot water by itself.
Yeah, exactly. One more question on the appendicitis thing. How do you feel about squatting on the toilet and the role that sitting on the toilet and squeezing too hard in that unnatural position where the rectum is kind of kinked? That last bit of large intestine is kinked, which makes it essentially like when you're pooping, it's like trying to squeeze peanut butter through a kinked garden hose. Whereas if you squat, it kind of just opens you up and you can defecate in a much lower stress, lower tension way. And that sitting on the toilet and forcing poop through a kinked intestine is actually what causes stress on the appendix and causes it to get inflamed in the first place.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. I didn't know people linked the two things together. My understanding of appendicitis, or the let's say the theory that I would say is probably accurate, but of course it is a theory, would be more around there can be some kind of toxins that build up into the appendicitis, and that is what causes the inflammation there. And that's kind of how I see it, of course. But of course, that is open to interpretation, how you want to see that. I would say the thing with it's called like the squatty potty, the thing that you're talking about. That's not something that I've delved into too much. It's not something super. I think my friend had one. I tried it maybe once, and I was like, this isn't for me, And but if it's something that you try and you see a benefit, it would make sense, and it probably works. But yeah, it was just something that was just, I wasn't willing to do it for the supposed benefits that you get from it, essentially.
Yeah. I've been doing that for a long time. I don't even use the squatty potty. I just squat right on the toilet seat. And I've been doing that since 2010.
Okay, so yeah, it's kind of into your routine at this point.
I don't even remember the last time I sat on a toilet. No, for real. That's one of my pillars of health that I teach people, is to squat on the toilet rather than to sit.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, for sure. I guess it's just it's a certain you have to adapt your routine there, a certain level of discomfort that might not be for everyone there, but
well, a lot of people don't have the flexibility to do it.
Also that it's definitely not a comfortable experience, right?
Unless you're really good at what they call the grok squat. Do you know the so-called third world squat, or the grok squat, right, which is just like, I'll show you. It's just
okay. But so you do that without the squatty potty. So I've seen people do it all.
One sec, Oscar. I can't
Sure.
hear you. Forgive me. Yeah, go ahead, Oscar.
So you do it. You're saying at this point you do that just without even using the elevation tool, the squatty potty.
Yeah. I just go like this
On the toilet seat itself.
So I just go like this.
Nice.
Yeah. People get afraid that it's like gonna splash and all that, but it's another like unfounded fear. It doesn't.
It's a limiting belief.
Yeah, and it's actually cleaner. Like if you're in a public restroom, instead of putting your thighs and ass on a dirty public bathroom stall, you're just putting the bottom of your shoes on it.
Absolutely.
So anyway, I thought I'd run that by you.
Yeah. Like I said, I've seen friends do it, but it's not something that I maybe tried it a few times, and I didn't see a crazy benefit for me to make it a routine. And to be honest, it sounds kind of funny, but like one of the places I'm most productive is when I'm on my phone in the toilet. So I think it would change.
Really?
It would change my routine if I had to do that in a squatting position and try and stay on balance and things like that.
No, I get it. That's interesting. And as you know, as a health coach, whatever works, right? The whole point is to get something functional and not to abide by orthodoxy.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess it's also when I work with people, it's often fixing some really foundational what they're doing day to day and a lot of their beliefs and switching those beliefs around. So I guess the squatty potty is something kind of a cherry on the cake. It's not going to transform someone's life instantly, right? Whereas you want to, in the beginning, when you start to help someone, you would want to focus more on what's something that they're going to say in 1 week. They say they feel significantly better, or their skin is better, or you know what I mean. So I guess I don't go into like something like a squatty potty for me it's like a cherry on the cake, but maybe for you it's been game changing, and I should get into it.
I'm not even saying that, but mind you, my channel is about jaw health and airway health, and I don't even know if I've ever even mentioned squatting on the toilet on this channel before. But it's in private. I definitely do, especially for people that have digestive issues like IBS or Crohn's. I find it can be a good place to start for a lot of people. But so you're a health coach. What are the issues that you find most in your clients now? And like, what's your demographic? Are you mostly coaching young men, or who's
mostly
your audience?
25 to 35 even 25 to 30-year-old guys, more in the kind of entrepreneur space. So guys who are very focused on their business and busy, and they just want to outsource the thinking basically, and just tell them what's the best routine that they can be doing and help them to do it, and be there to answer questions and verify in terms of some accountability there, make sure that they're comfortable, but also getting it done essentially. So balancing, the kind of forcefulness and let's do this and motivation with are you comfortable? Are you relaxed? Are you feeling good? Are you having a good time? Are you enjoying what you're doing with your health, with your routine and stuff like that? So that's the kind of demographic. The most common issues, well, there's a lot of non-health issues, actually, a lot of stresses that people have, a lot of anxieties, and I've experienced these things myself, relating, especially in the entrepreneur space, a lot of anxiety about money and getting money, keeping your money, and feeling like you're never enough, basically, and a lot of comparisons. So there's a lot of psychology problems, actually, that people have, not just the health.
That's super interesting.
Absolutely, especially in the entrepreneur community. It's really, really crazy, and it's really from the worship of money and having money as their god, essentially. And I'm not detached from that myself. I have those struggles, and it's been very interesting to see it in other people and be conscious about it and try and steer in a different direction. But yeah, I'd say that causes a lot of anxiety for people.
What is your attitude toward that? Do you bring in your Christianity into your perspective on money and how much is enough?
I have my own struggles with those things myself, and it's difficult if you have a certain, let's say, mind that is inclined to, let's say, valuing, let's say, financial stability and things like that, and it's difficult not to get pulled into that world. I guess what I've started to see and my perspective on it now is more just understanding what you really need, basically. And because people, and including myself, I used to have this attitude that I need money, and I could never explain why. just this feeling of inadequacy and needing more, but not knowing even what for. And I had had quite a lot of financial success in the last 2 years in my business, but I still didn't own any significant possessions. I struggled to even spend the money that I had, and so really understanding why I need this money in the first place and what do I really want, and defining those things, and even doing some calculations, right? And some of that tedious, annoying stuff that I don't want to do, and does require, let's say, some external help or some effort, subconscious effort towards, and kind of seeing that for what I really want and the lifestyle that I want and the things that I want to do in my life, like I like to go on travel trips and hunting and stuff. For those things, I need this amount, and so that's what I need, and if I have that, I'm good, basically. And it's way less than I was picturing in my head, and so that's kind of been helpful. And just not getting dragged, not worshiping money too much is really important. And I kind of got into, I was living in Dubai, which is the epitome of money worshipping place, and where people, your value is defined by your possessions and the watch that you have, where you live, the car that you drive. It's the ultimate place like that. And I got dragged into that. Well, I dragged myself, of course. It's always my own fault. I dragged myself into that world, and I got sucked into it, and I was attracted to all of those things. And it lasted a good while, and now I've kind of really started to come out of it, let's say, and I'm seeing those possessions, especially things like expensive watches, for what they are, which is just almost a symbol of insecurity. That's kind of how I see it now. Not for everyone, right? Some people say they have a collection and they like watches and stuff, and that's fine, right? For me, it was really almost that, essentially, and just realize, once you see it for what it is, you start to change that. It's like that young quote of when you bring forth the unconscious to the conscious, it kind of changes you at that point. And so that's kind of what happened to me. Once I started to see things for what they were, and people were worshipping money and defining themselves by their possessions, and even things like you would meet someone and you kind of you have to realize that you only like this person because of what they have, not because of who they are. And once you start to really see that, and everyone is in that world and worshipping each other because of their possessions and the money, then you can't. It's like the red pill, right? You take the red pill, you can't go back, essentially, and you see things for what they are, and you kind of depart from that world there. And that's kind of where I'm at the moment. But I'm by no means perfect in those things. I still have my struggles and anxieties towards having sufficient amounts of money and all that kind of stuff. But certainly seeing it a bit differently in the last 6 to 12 months.
Yeah. Have you ever found yourself being attracted or liking someone just because of how physically attractive they were, but then you realize, I'm only treating this person with respect because he has a really nice jaw structure, but actually he's kind of an asshole?
I'd say that.
Do you notice that bias in yourself, that you give handsome people pretty privilege?
I would say more with girls than with guys with that one, but not consciously with guys. I'd say more if you know someone has a lot of money, it requires some real values that to treat them equally, and some good principles there that is not easy, I'd say, to possess in this world, especially. And that's something I've tried to develop myself over the last 12 months or so, getting more principled there and sticking to it, and not being taken by the money. It's like there's a quote in the poem by Rudyard Kipling. He has a poem called If, and he says, if you can walk with kings and talk with peasants and not lose the common touch, that's kind of what you want to be able to do, basically. And it's not easy by any means to treat everyone the same, no matter who they are. But it's something to go towards as much as I can. That's kind of how I see it.
Yeah. Do you find that when you're able to define how much is enough, that actually allows a person to proceed with their business in a more straightforward way without feeling like, because when you know how much is enough, you can put boundaries on how much you actually need to make, right? Like, so for example, with me, I'm building this house. I have a construction loan on it. I need to make that payment. I also need to support my baby and my wife to some degree, and be able to afford good, healthy food. For me, that means like good cuts of beef and, nice kimchi and other such things, right? Occasionally, like a rack of naked juice in some kombucha, which is, it's expensive stuff. But like, that's all I really need, is to not have my house be foreclosed on and afford my kid. And there's a number that is enough for
Mhm.
that. And it's probably like something like, I don't know, it's not more than, let's say it's not more than $150,000 a year, which is really not that much if you think
Right,
about
absolutely.
it. And then it's like, okay, well, I'm not making that right now, but I'm making this right now. And to get to there, maybe I just iterate my business a little bit, tweak it, add 20,000 here, 10,000 there. And now I'm getting closer to a point where I'm making a living.
Yeah.
Instead of having this idea, oh, do I want to be Dan Bilzerian? Do I want to be PBD, where he's worth $100 million or whatever? Tom Brady is worth whatever. Should I strive to be Elon Musk, worth 200 billion? It's just like, you can define what counts as a good life for you, and then it's you can work deliberately to get to that specific point, and then anything after that is really, it's really just going to sit in a bank account, or else you're going to spend it on bullshit like watches and new cars and boats and stuff that is just going to rot away in your driveway.
Yeah, definitely doing that kind of calculation is definitely useful. I would say on the flip side, you don't want to get what I've seen is that, and what other entrepreneurs will tell you is that it takes the same effort to make a $300,000 business than it does to make a $5 million business. And so you don't want to get caught in the trap of working to make 300K in a way. It's always a balance, right, between being calculated and just knowing what you need and not grinding too much, versus also you can kind of, if you're smart, and I know you're very smart, you can kind of play the game a little bit, and you'll see that it can be not that difficult to actually have a bigger goal, and think bigger can also be a useful thing. And you can see that making 500K a year, it doesn't have to be that difficult. Of course, it is certainly not easy, let's say. That's why not many people do it, but it's also not impossible to do that, you know. And it's don't limit yourself either, basically. So you always want to balance both of those things together. But I'd say most people lack what you described, and what the exercise I went through of really considering what I need in life, and thinking maybe grinding for extra isn't really worth it. You don't get anything more, right? There's like this story where a man, it's my friend told me the story the other day. I'll try and remember it as best as I can. The man is fishing in a boat, and a young fisherman comes up to him and he says, "Oh, you should, if you use this machine, you can catch so many more fish, and then you can do this, and you can do this." And the old fisherman says, "But what for? What for, basically?" And he says, "Well," and the old fisherman says, "I like to, eat my fish with my wife in the evening and fish during the day, and that's what I like to do." And you're saying, "Oh, but you can build this technology, and you can go to Mars, and you can drive an electric car." And he's like, "But I don't want to do that." And so just kind of being satisfied with the thing, really seeing that. How does it change your life if you suddenly have $1 billion in the bank? Most people, it wouldn't actually change their life very much. They're still going to, if they're more like yourself and I, more kind of thinking oriented, they're probably going to be at the computer most of the time and just in the house. That's what we like to do. And your life doesn't change that much, And so once you kind of ground yourself with that information, you can maybe not hustle yourself so much and ruin your experience right now for a future state, which never really comes if you have that hustle and bustle and failure to enjoy right now that people have.
Sure. But at the same time, what you're saying is you're going to put in 60 hours a week to make 200K. And the difference between making 200K and a million is not additional labor. It's almost like a paradigm shift that happens mentally and spiritually for you, where you just think in a slightly different way and maybe on a larger scale or something. Can you talk about that paradigm shift that gets you from 200K to a million?
Sure.
For the same amount of work?
I guess in my kind of brain, it comes from seeing what was possible. So once upon a time, before I started my business, let's say 2.5, 3 years ago, the idea of making $10,000 a month was like radical. Like, what? $10,000 a month? And that's, so if you have that perspective, then that really, you kind of create your own reality by making that impossible, right? And then I went into like entrepreneurship communities, and I met people that were making millions a month, literally millions a month. And you think, what? Like, hold on a minute. What do you mean? They're not that much smarter than myself. Maybe not at all. They're just doing a slightly different thing, or they have some different information a different business model, or whatever it is, right? So I guess just seeing for me, it's about seeing what was possible. And that was all I needed, essentially. Just give me options, and I'll run with it. And so that's how it was for myself. But yeah, I'd say just opening up seeing what's out there and seeing what people do is very helpful. And seeing the ways people are making money. And there's many different ways, and all kinds of stuff, and things that you wouldn't expect would make a lot of money and things like that. That's what it was for me.
Yeah. A lot of my audience are probably looking at you right now and they're thinking, obviously, Oscar is able to make a lot of money as a coach. He's handsome, he's articulate, he's got a beautiful smile, he's a Chad. And they're going to say, I can't do that because I can't put on this this beautiful face and present myself and sell myself as a coach the way that Oscar can. How can misfit guys in their teens and 20s and 30s that maybe aren't so good looking and that maybe aren't so pleasant to talk to, maybe they're a little bit social anxiety or even borderline sort of like autistic, where they struggle to speak fluidly and converse with other people the way you and I are talking now, what business model might you suggest for those types of guys?
It depends what kind of skills they have, but certainly, there's many business models where you don't need to have a face on the business necessarily. So yeah, don't feel like you can't do anything just because of the ways that you look. Firstly, I would even put doubt into that belief in the first place, and it's really all about the attitude that you have first and foremost, and fixing that in yourself basically, and focusing on being the best version of yourself, as cringy as that might sound, that quote, but really being good in yourself and being smart and well-informed and having a good attitude and of open-mindedness and fun. And when you meet people is very important. And, being a student of life, essentially, and having that kind of attitude, that's the most important. Those are the most important things that can get you somewhere. And there's a million and one different. It would really depend on the skills. It's easy for me to say this now because I didn't necessarily do this, but yeah, I mean, if you wanted to make money, my brain works by looking at what do people do out there and then doing it with my own twist. That's kind of how my kind of brain works, is more of an entrepreneurial type of mind, and I would just do that again. I would probably join some kind of networks, and I would see how are people making money, and I would just try a business model until something stuck and you started to feel like you had developing an interest, and then wanted to pursue that specific business model further. So that could be e-commerce, it could be sales, it could be any of the main business models out there, some kind of agency, being a coach for something else, something that you are good at. So yeah, I would just look at what people are doing out there and trying things, and something will, as long as you stick to it and you're enjoying it, something will eventually stick.
So are you a hybrid health and business coach at the same time?
Business isn't something that I go into with my clients at all. I take care of the physical health, and then my partner cares more for people in the psychology, and he's the person that really helped me a lot. And he takes care of clients on the psychology side of things. So we kind of work together there. But yeah, business, it sometimes goes there with my partner more with the clients, because as I was saying, and we actually got to this thread because you said, what are some of the main health problems people have, or the main problems people have? And I said, well, most of people's problems aren't even physical health. It's actually people's psychology. And so naturally, the things that get in the way of being able to be healthy and care for your physical body is things like the business stresses, what we talked about. And so there you can kind of start to go into someone's business and why is that? What's the problem, essentially, and finding what the hang up is and trying to shift someone's perspective. But also relationships get in the way of one's health as well, and one's enjoying your life experience is obviously about your relationships, or in many people's case, the lack of relationships that they have. So it's really the mind and body. Those are the things that we cover on the program. I'm definitely interested in expanding to business later in life, but for now, I feel like the most work that I can do for people is in the mind and the body with my business partner. I feel like that's where we have the most expertise, and it's a very unique program that is not offered anywhere.
Have I met that business partner?
It's John. You met John, yeah.
Oh, dude, all your friends are amazing guys. Being real with you, if I weren't married with a baby and being very geo tethered to my town in Massachusetts, I would ask if I could join up with you guys and start traveling with you
Absolutely. I think
guys.
you would fit right in.
I think I would. No, I know I
Yeah,
would.
absolutely.
I know I would, but unfortunately, I'm not really like that. If you caught me 5 years ago, that's where I was at. I was living in a van, traveling, looking for community to be part of. I was part of a Buddhist community for a long time. Tell me about the importance of your male relationships and your camaraderie with those guys that I met who are all awesome. How much of a positive impact has that had on your mental health, your physical health, your ambitions as an entrepreneur, and just overall, and as part of your satisfaction in life?
Well, I'd say the most interesting thing that I have with my friends, and we hang out, spend a lot of time together, is that we are all very different, essentially. And what happens, especially for someone with my kind of, let's say, business brain, you get very caught up with only hanging out with people who are very similar to you. Especially you join some communities of other entrepreneurs, and everyone has the same kind of brain, right? And if like we like the personality stuff, everyone has this very similar personality types. Very, very.
You like, just to specify on that, you guys like the Myer Briggs personality typing, the 16 personality types. Is that what you just referenced?
We have our own. We built something on top of. Well, not on top of, even, like it's similar, but it's much more in depth. It kind of builds more on socionics, which is more like the hardcore theory, and it goes beyond that. And I think we have, well, not I think, I know we have the most advanced understanding of typology on the planet, and is very active in how I communicate with my friends, and we use it as a tool for a good psychology, a good mind, and and just as a tool of communication also.
Yeah, and not to sidetrack
Yeah,
where you
we
were
were
going, and I want you to finish your thought, but let me just say, I am super fascinated with Myer-Briggs personality typing, and have been for about 2 years when I discovered it and realized that I might be an INTP. And then I read a book about INTP, and it felt like it was written specifically for me, and that nothing has ever understood my mind and its structure the way this book about INTP did. But then when I got on with you guys, you guys paid, well, you didn't, but your guys paid me for a JawHack consultation. But then in the end, they retyped me and they said, no, you're probably not actually an
ENTP.
INTP. You're probably an ENTP.
It, of course, it's very similar. It has the same kind of functions and a similar attentional manner, but it's more of an extroversion. That's even why you have the interviews and the podcast and the YouTube channel. That's not really something that an introverted NTP and INTP would necessarily do, or much less likely to do that. So yeah, that was probably the biggest clue. But of course, it's similar, so it would make sense that you read this book and you feel like it understands you.
Yeah, totally. So
yes,
continue.
I did get sidetracked there. I think that can happen
please.
a lot.
My bad. I do that. I get busted a lot for interrupting my guests in the comment sections. I just get so excited.
Yeah.
Man.
No, that's the extroverted intuition there that you got. But yeah, what I was saying, you asked me about my friends and stuff like that. So yeah, what I was saying was essentially by having the kind of business mind, and I think a lot of people have this, but especially with business people, they only start to hang out with other business-minded people. And what happens is that when you hang out with people, only with people that are so similar to you, you all have needs on the other side, right? So you have how can I describe it? You have essentially have what is conscious and what is unconscious in you, your shadow. And everyone has requirements emotionally, everyone has requirements in the sensing world. So because it's simple alchemy, right? If you are something, then you are not something else, right? So in my case, let's say I'm very business-minded, but I don't produce my own theories so much, because that's not what a business mind does. The business mind takes what's out there and extroverts the idea, right? But they don't produce the ideas. That's where John is someone that produces the idea. He has that kind of mind. But by himself, he would never put those ideas out there too much, basically. And so when you combine us together, suddenly that is the alchemy there, and that is what creates something, an original idea that gets out there, essentially. So I'm not the best at explaining this, but I'll try my best. Essentially, when you hang out with people that are only similar to you, you can't really give people what they need very much, because what they need is not what you produce by yourself. So you need to hang out with an array of people, like the quote, it takes a village to raise a child, right? That's what it means. And you're the child in the village of life or whatever. So you cannot just hang out with people who are only similar to you, because if you do that, there's some unconscious parts of your psyche that are really, they're not getting what they need, basically, and you're going to miss out, let's say, as a result, or you're not going to have the wholesomeness. And so prior to meeting my friends and coming together and kind of building the mini village, let's say, that we have, or the friendship that we have, I was only hanging out with predominantly, of course, there's always some people that come into your life and, that are very different, and you kind of go back to them for the reasons I'm describing. But yes, essentially I was only hanging out with a lot of business people. And what happens there is that it just doubles down on what your strengths are, but also doubles down on your weaknesses too. And there's no one that can cater to what you need there. And so it's very important to hang out with an array of personalities and seeing the value in different people that I would have otherwise previously thought lazy, boring, unambitious, especially that one. People, oh yes, this person, my grandma or my grandpa or my dad, they're so unambitious. They just, like, let's say someone like me, I can be very hectic, all over the place, clumsy. I'm going to stumble into stuff. I'm not relaxed naturally by myself. I have to get the relaxation from someone else. They have to be around me, and then I will absorb that relaxation. But someone who is very relaxed and stable can also be boring, right? So I would maybe previously I'd look at someone like that and say, this person's so boring. They're not changing. They're not traveling the world. They're shit. There's nothing there for me. Like, they're not my friend, basically. There's nothing for us to talk to about. But now I understand that to balance my hecticness, I need those kinds of boring, stable characters in my life. And I really appreciate that, because when I'm around those people, it helps me to be less hectic and have a better experience, basically. And on the flip side, those boring, let's say unambitious, or people that don't change very much throughout the course of their life, they have that kind of inertia. They get so much when I'm there. They get a lot of my motivation, my appetite for life that I have. And so there is an alchemical exchange that happens when you have different personalities, basically. So my point, which I eventually get to, is to say that it's very important, and this is something that I've learned now, to hang out with people who are not only interested in the same things as you, and really people that are on opposite sides of the spectrum, and once you can appreciate the value of that person, you get a lot from that relationship there, and it's mutual always, because there's always an exchange that happens in the kind of alchemy. And understanding that has been the biggest game changer for me, and really improved my day-to-day experience a lot.
What would you say to young guys that have no guy friends at all? Not to mention guy friends that are very similar to them, but just no guy friends.
Well, I would look at their life. I say, are you doing any sports? What are you doing day to day? That kind of character in my mind is probably someone that is just playing video games in their room, and that's fine to play video games, but you need to do some of the opposite thing probably to what they're doing right now, and they need to join the local tennis club or something, join a football team and interact with people there, basically. That would be probably what they're needing, but I would always look at their individual situation and why they're finding that they don't have as many friends as they'd like.
Mm-hmm. It's totally a non-starter, though, isn't it? To not have friends. The alchemy of life can't happen if there's only one compound that's in the mix.
Yeah. Of course, you always want to be good by yourself, but at the same time, you have to acknowledge that you're not whole by yourself. There's always a shadow that needs to be filled, essentially, and you can, of course, try and strive to be the lone wolf there, but I've experienced on the other side, it's to have wholesomeness is very nice, and to me it makes sense that this is how kind of goes into kind of God and things like that, but essentially saying like this is how humans are intended to live by God and things like that.
Mm-hmm. What role does Christianity play in your whole system?
Yeah, I'd say it's not so. We kind of just have a philosophy, it's essentially taking some of the lessons of the Bible, right? And I guess the most important one that you can is not always easy to apply, but that's why it's kind of for someone that is principled, is to say that you want to treat others how you wish to be treated. And that is the most important principle that is not always easy to stick to. And I'd say that is the most, the one that I try to, I remind myself of pretty much every day throughout the day, and that's a good principle to live by. But yeah, I'd say it's just about the principles, and that's one that we take with us.
You said before that you guys think a lot about death. Do you guys think a lot about what happens after death?
So I mean, it's not that me or myself think about death so much. It's that we kind of accept it essentially, and how that plays out in everyday life would be not being too attached to things essentially, right? It's that acceptance and unattachment, and that's kind of how it is in reality. In terms of the afterlife and things like that, I would say not too much. And I guess this is something else that I've started to get a lot more into in the last 6 months or so, but really distinguishing what is theoretical versus what is something that you can experience with your own eyes, right? With your own five senses. And previously in the past, I've been very caught up with what is theoretical, and what could be essentially. But what I see, and this is the same with health, right? People get very caught up with, this hormone, and I detox this from the brain, and and it can be interesting to explore those things and explore what happens in the afterlife, or explore if the world is flat or not. But in truth, it's nothing that you'll ever experience with your own five senses. And so, in that spirit of unattachment, you want to say, well, don't get too caught up in those kinds of theories. And that's kind of how I treat it myself. And it's been very useful for me to not go into those things. Not saying that we can't discuss the question. I mean, to not think too much about theories, and to say, who cares, essentially. And not to say that you can't discuss it, right? But certainly not going to get caught up in it, essentially, and worry about it. Not saying that you're worrying, of course. And not going to, it's not going to be a big part of my life to say, is the world flat? And, am I going to live to 137 years old? And because you'll never know, essentially. You will never know if you will or not. And yeah, so that's also a kind of philosophy that I try to live by more and more. And that's what I tell to clients also. And they find that very, very relaxing, because what you see out there, if you type in, you Google, let's say, even low testosterone, right, and blood tests, and people, my whatever, my ferritin level is this number, and my cholesterol is this, and and clients come to me with these blood results, and they say, what do I do? I'm stressed. The doctor said this is out of whack, and and it's all theoretical. All of that is complete theory, and if what does it even mean? It actually really means nothing. And so when you remove that whole worry about theory and ideas that people have, it's very, very alleviating for people. And you say, we don't care about that. We do not care about those things, because it's not theoretical. And it is theoretical, and we can entertain it. We can look at the blood test. We can play the blood test optimization game, and I do that. But it's not something that I use to dictate my own subjective experience of the world. I'm not going to determine how I feel by a blood test. I know how I feel that's not determined by my cholesterol level. You know what I mean? So I think it's very nice for people when you reject a lot, or you give them the option to say, we do not care about those things, and you do not let those things rule over your life. You're going to have a much more peaceful mind. That's kind of what I see. It's kind of alleviating a lot of anxiety around things that people can't experience with their five senses, grounding them into what is right now. Does that make sense?
So if you're de-emphasizing the theoretical when it comes to blood tests and nutrition theory, then what do you focus on in the absence of that? Subjective experience, like you said. What makes me feel good? What gives me energy?
Yeah, so it would be two things. One, how are your energy levels? Two, what health problems have you had? Like things that you can see or experience with your stomach, for example. Digestion would be a big one. So that is a much more important and grounded measure of one's health and how one is day to day than my cholesterol level is blah, 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 blah. It means nothing, because you can also do a different test and then it's fine, or you do a test 2 hours later and the blood levels change. So I can go there with the blood test, and I have done, and I've experimented, and I don't see it producing good results for people, and it makes people very, very stressed. I can give you one more example.
Yeah.
One of my clients, he came to me recently and he said, I did a glyphosate urine test. And my glyphosate urine level, glyphosate being the pesticide that they spray, and he said, my glyphosate urine level is sky high, through the roof. And what do? How do I lower it? Right? And who's to say, right? So then he showed me the blood test, glyphosate in the urine, it's through the roof, right? But it's like, well, is that even a bad thing? Is it leaving your body? And if you now take some supplements to try and lower the level, maybe it stays inside of you. So there's so many possibilities as to if that's even a bad thing. And what you're going to try and do now, hack it with supplements and all kinds of stuff just to try and lower the blood level. It's like, you can try, but it's not something that you'll never know, essentially, if it's true or not, or what's working, what is good, what isn't, right? So it's just purely theoretical. And in a way, it's better for most people to say, fuck all of that. I'm not even going to go there. It's a stress that I do not need. And I'm going to use the subjective metrics of energy levels, physical problems. Is my hair falling out? Is my stomach gargling? How do my eyes look? Are they red, bloodshot, whatever they previously experienced that they want to change? That is a much more good, grounded measure of one's health than this blood test, as this theoretical blood test, which might not be accurate in any way, and we do not know if it's a bad thing. And
yeah, Hippocrates never had access to blood tests.
Right. So exactly, more of the just what is real, basically, what is grounded right now. That with your five senses is a much better metric of, and that is the only one that matters, right? Because the blood test could, imagine you put the wrong name on it, and now you've got your wrong blood test, and now you're determining that my cholesterol is this, and so now I feel bad, and then the doctor calls you and says, oh, sorry, actually we got the blood test mixed up, yours is this. Oh, now I feel good because my blood level is normal. It's just it's a game, and like I said, I can play the game, and it's interesting to entertain, and I'm certainly interested in doing a lot of lab work at some point if I was to get in a position where that was feasible, either financially or with enough resources in other ways. But it's not something that it's not how I measure my own health, essentially. So I'm not going to impart that on other people either.
Sure. Do you guys use intoxicants at all? Alcohol, cannabis, party drugs, or are you guys straight edge?
So one of the things that we tried some mushrooms a couple of times. And what we concluded was that we're essentially on mushrooms all the time. We really do not need to take any psychedelics. And we have that kind of state. Of course, not necessarily the visuals, but certainly some amount of the feeling that you get of the laughter and things like that. So yeah, we kind of determined that it's not something that is interesting to do often. But it's certainly very fun to do once in a while. But it's not something that is necessarily part of what I tell people to do, or what I do myself, or what any of us do here.
You guys don't blaze up on weekends?
No. I did that a lot. I'm from the UK, so in the UK these days, at least, everyone starts to smoke marijuana, or it's very popular from the age of 12, pretty much 12 or 13. And I had those experiences when I was that age, and that was enough for me. I'm not going to go back there.
Do you think marijuana is a psyop?
Wow, what does that mean? Anything can be a psyop, right? And I wouldn't necessarily say that it's deliberate. I would say more so that it makes money, so people will want to go there and try and make money from it because people like the cannabis. It's in some ways it's nice, right? It makes food taste better. It makes you laugh. It can be fun. It can make you forget about your anxiety. So people like it, and there's a way to make money with it. So people will go there and try to make money with it. But outside of that, I mean, getting into conspiracy lane, I wouldn't necessarily say, it's not something that I like to do too much, the conspiracy stuff. I think it has that same problem of, stress and anxieties of, are they out to get us and things like that, which I don't like too much. Even as I was explaining the doctors earlier, I want to add always a disclaimer, like I do not think that doctors are evil by any means or their intentions are bad. They really believe what they're saying. They really believe in the bacteria is bad. They really, really are afraid themselves of it. and that's all it is. And it's not an evil conspiracy there.
Do you how do you feel about nicotine and caffeine, stimulants, productive drugs?
Certainly they're good, right, at working to help you do work that you don't really want to do. That's actually, when you think about it, that's what they do for people. The
Sure.
coffee that gets you into the flow state, into the work which you otherwise wouldn't be in a flow state in, right? And if you really enjoy something, you don't need any stimulants because you naturally go into that flow state. So they produce those kinds of effects for people, which is good for, let's say, the utilitarian economy that we have. But outside of that, in terms of good for your health, I wouldn't say it enhances your health. I'd say it probably makes it worse. But it's not like drastic where you're going to get, cancer within a few years of drinking coffee, but more of a long-term problem.
So your primary thing that you recommend for people, is it nutrition based? I saw that you had some videos about improving testosterone. I see on your Instagram page you have some badass photos with cartons of raw pasture raised eggs. What do you prescribe?
So like I said, a lot of it is not a lot of it, but a significant aspect is definitely on the psychology side of things and removing stresses for people and simplification in their life rather than adding complexity. So that's a big part of the philosophy. In terms of prescription, it really depends on the individual, right? So you can say there are some principles to it, and one principle, for example, would certainly be animal-based diet as the foundation of any healthful diet. Animal foods are, without a doubt, the most nutritious foods, and they should be the foundation, the staple, or even the entirety of someone's diet. So that would be one principle. Then there's a second principle, which would be to say that the more raw or unpasteurized the diet is, the more healthful that it is. But that is, of course, to a person's level of comfort, right? So it's nothing that I would impose on someone if they didn't want to, right? So if someone, and just to clarify what I mean when I say the less cooked, the more healthful it is, it would be understanding that a raw steak has more nutrients in it, it's easier to digest, and that is something that you can experience as soon as you eat it, than a well-done steak, which is going to be more heavy in your digestion, and it's going to be less nutritious just by virtue of the heating process. So that is a principle that the less cooked the food is, the more healthier, or the easier to digest, the more nutritious it is. But of course, you apply the principle to the degree that you feel comfortable with. So if someone doesn't want to eat a raw steak, that's completely fine, because you can get the majority of the benefits from a seared steak, for example. And that is going to be a much better, for most people, taste experience, and much more comfortable for people to do. So yeah, I'd say it's an animal, certainly animal-based diet is important for everyone to follow, to have animal products in there. And then applying the principle of the less cooked, the better is a good one. So those would be like the two of the main principles. Then, of course, there's specific remedies, which are partially from Arjunus, but also kind of what I've seen with my own eyes. And I try not to recommend things that I have not seen work now. I've worked with over 300 entrepreneurs, right? Some of people making a lot of money and seeing with a lot of health problems, and seeing what has worked with my own eyes is not something that you read in a book. That's something that you experience. So I try to only recommend things at this point that I've seen work for people. And there would be some remedies, let's say natural remedies. I could give you some examples. Let's say if someone has nausea, there's a remedy where they can consume, ideally, there's key ingredients for nausea would be like water, which is naturally sparkling. So the source of carbon is not synthetic. So some brands in the US, you have like Gerolsteiner. It's one of the best brands, let's say. Then you have like raw unheated honey and lemon juice. So those three ingredients are really effective for someone that has nausea.
Mixed into a kind of
soda? It's a lemonade,
soda?
essentially, right? A natural lemonade. But you can also isolate the ingredients, honey being the most important of the three ingredients. And that will...
Because it's probiotic?
Well, you could speculate as to why the honey works so well, right? But you would look at either the enzymes, probiotics, the part of sugar that's in the honey. It could be so many different things, right? But we would speculate that. So that would be like a remedy for someone that has nausea, for example, and that's a natural remedy that people can use. I can give you another example from Hippocrates. I had a client that was diabetic, and he was taking diabetes medication, and I had read that Hippocrates was using milk fasting as a way to fix people with diabetes. So milk fasting being where you only consume raw milk for a period of time as a way to stabilize people's blood sugar levels, to get them off diabetes medication. And so I kind of took that and adapted it slightly to add some more protein. So essentially, I put this client on a prescription of raw milkshakes as like 80 to 100% of his diet, which is a raw milkshake is composed of raw milk, eggs, and honey, and it tastes very good for anyone that wants to try. And this client drank the milkshakes, and a little bit of went to a restaurant here and there and had some steaks and things like that, but predominantly just the milkshakes as 80 to 90% of his diet for about 3 months, and completely off all diabetes medication, blood sugar level stable, and completely. He lost a lot of weight. He was about 130 pounds, and he went down to less. Not 130 pounds, 230 pounds, and went to around 200 pounds. But even a bit less, and just completely transformed his physical body, but also, of course, the shift that happens when you go from eating, let's say, normal food, even healthy food, meat and vegetables and some potatoes and whatever, when you shift someone's perspective and now they're doing a diet of raw animal-based diet, which is a raw milkshake diet, completely transforms your whole perception of the world there. It's really an unplugging from the norm, departure from societal norms there, and completely changed his whole worldview, and of course took him off all of those meds that he was on, and healed him essentially. And that was done through what I learned from Hippocrates there. So it's a mix of principles, but also some natural remedies that you see for specific problems that people would have.
What do you think is the relationship between nutrition and mental health?
It's an interesting one, because many people will, especially when they get really into health, they will start to have the belief that mental health is based on nutrition entirely, almost entirely, right? And people will say things like the gut-brain axis, and you can change your mental health biochemically through food. And I don't necessarily disagree with those things. However, in line with the kind of philosophy I was talking about earlier, I really take the perspective that it's mostly perspectives that have to be shifted. So it's mostly a psychological problem. And the thing with psychology is something that you can fix quite quickly. You can change someone's perspective, and John does that, my partner, in 20 to 60 minutes, completely alleviate their mental anxieties in that time frame. So it's much faster than, let's say, I'm going to try and fix my mental health through food. This is going to take me weeks or months or years. And so I like the psychological approach, and I've seen it work in myself a lot, but also in hundreds of other people at this point. So I would steer away from saying mental health is nutrition. Not that it isn't, and it's definitely related, especially kind of twitches and anxieties, and that's definitely can be influenced through food. But the majority of people's problems is not related to nutrition. It's really anxieties, hang-ups, perspectives that they have that can be shifted, like I say, in a matter of minutes in a good conversation, essentially. So that's the perspective I take there. And I can give you one more example. Like, people will say, I don't know how, maybe, I mean, I can probably assume we have a similar opinion, but people will say homosexuals people become homosexual because of the chemicals in the food and the water and things like that. And again, it might influence those things a little bit, but I'd say it's much more about psychology there. And if that was your interest, to make someone not homosexual, you're not going to change the water and they're going to be no longer homosexual. It's about their psychology essentially, and their perspective and their relationships to their parents and things like that. So just to highlight the point there of physical versus mental, I'd say the mental is very, very important and overlooked, basically.
Mm-hmm. I want you to critique my attitude toward the relationship between food and mental health and health in general. So the perspective I sort of take into my life is that bad foods, bad drugs, bad biochemical
Mhm.
inputs can kind of taint the mind and make you sluggish and cause negative thoughts to arise, because you wake up, you feel crummy, you feel fatigued, and then a negative thought enters your mind, and then maybe you feel slightly depressed, and then instead of doing something proactive, you do something uh, lazy or lethargic, or you skip a duty that you have, and now you've begun a path of like not doing the right thing, because the initial stimulus was this negative body state, because the night before maybe you had a plate of french fries or something cooked in vegetable oils high in carbohydrate. So my attitude has been that uh, you have to put in clean physical inputs in order to have a positive biochemical state that leads to good thinking, that enables you to proceed in a positive way through life.
Mhm.
How would you tweak that?
It's not that I would disagree. It could be true, but I would always point to look at Jesus on the cross, right? He can completely sacrifice his physical needs, and he still has that enlightened attitude that I try and take with me everywhere I go, right? So his physical food requirements, they don't get in the way of his attitude. So that's like a good example, I'd say. But I would say that's fine to think what you think, and it's not necessarily wrong. But as I say, I've just seen people's ability to change their mental perspectives without even talking about nutrition to be really, really effective, to the point where,
Wow.
yeah, if someone has a hang up and an anxiety, it's not the food, it's really their worldview and some kind of relationship that they have, or their perspective, essentially.
So you think it is a dynamic hybrid relationship where the physical inputs affect the mental outputs, but then also the mental inputs affect everything more so. So you're saying the mind is above the body in terms of what to tweak and what to go for when trying to do self-improvement?
I would say, of course, you can always say that they're probably the same, right? They probably have equal powering. However, I'd say the mind is more overlooked than the body, which can then justify some more emphasis on the mind. But in many ways, they're both equal. And sometimes, perhaps I'm underestimating the physical body because, I've been doing like a really good routine for 4 years, extremely clean and very strict diet. I really rarely cheat or eat foods outside of what I would tell someone is good for them. So sometimes perhaps I've kind of forgotten what it's like to not feel good, essentially physically. So that could also be maybe a flaw in my own thinking. But just as I say, from what I've seen, you can really shift someone's perspective and give them a better day-to-day mental state very quickly without any shifts in nutrition. The things that I do notice in the nutrition is fatigue, for example. If someone is very tired all the time, that's definitely not a mental problem. That is a physical problem. If someone has poor digestion, that is almost entirely physical. And so that requires, in those cases, very much a physical solution will help. But you can always bring it back to the mental. You could say, well, why are they tired? Why are they unable to take care of themselves? And it's going to be something that's preventing them in their mind, that is disrupting their life, right? And a shift in perspective is going to be good for them. Yeah, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I think that people veer away from the mental change because it's invisible. Obviously, it's a lot less transparent. You can't touch it. So my approach with myself has always been to try to keep the clean physical inputs constant as a way of fertilizing the soil, waiting for the opportunity for the mind to bloom out of that physical soil. And maybe my approach to addressing the mind isn't as direct as what you and your partner do. But I think that for people who don't really know what path to take mentally and how to sort of build their mind or change their mind, I think that keeping clean physical inputs will at least keep you on the path and set the stage for those mental changes to happen once you finally get the key that's needed to sort of unlock mentally the right state for you.
It certainly wouldn't be a bad idea, so long as the pursuit of a good self-improvement routine isn't causing anxieties, right? And that's that, like I was describing, when people get too caught up
Right,
in self-improvement, they can actually start to experience a not so enjoyable life, and they start to grind. And what happens when you start to grind and you go too much into optimization and self-improvement is like in the movie Fight Club, you start to have that impulse to self-destruct, basically. And so it's good to integrate some of the self-destruction impulse that humans have. And that's the kind of acceptance of death and embracing, not caring too much, embracing unattachment. And that's kind of a good balance that you can have in there. But yeah, of course, having a good physical routine, it's going to prime you for a good life, certainly. But it's not everything, right? Of course, people have to acknowledge that the mind is there, and it's going to be a big part of your day-to-day experience to have a good, healthy perspective on life, and not dealing with stresses and having too much attachment, especially to things like money, as I was describing.
Mm-hmm. So I want to pry a little bit deeper into the mental training that you guys do for your clients. Mm-hmm. So take me, for example. My life right now is very scattered. I have the tax business that I'm involved in. I have JawHacks. I have this house that I'm building. I have my wife and my baby. It's hard for me to focus exclusively on, let's say, JawHacks. Let's say I wanted to make JawHacks the number one thing and grow this business and expand it and make it bigger and better, right? How do you coach someone who is limited into how much control they have over their actual life circumstances because of duty to family, duty to relationships, in my case, duty to my dad and that business that I'm involved in? What would you say to someone like me to try to optimize me for business?
Yeah.
Let's say to optimize me for my JawHacks
yeah,
business.
That's what more John does, right? And my partner John, because if you look at our personalities, my strengths are more on the motivational side, getting people excited, getting people into the program, and being exposing the ideas like I'm doing right now, for example, on the podcast and making videos and stuff like that. So that's my strengths, right? And in terms of really listening to individuals very carefully and changing their perspectives, that's more John who does that. So I'm just saying my advice isn't necessarily representative of what would be the best here. So it would actually, John would love to come on, I'm sure, and have a chat with you. It would be cool, actually. I think you'd really enjoy it.
I would love to have him on and have him like do a session with me.
Yeah. That's like, we did this radio show recently, and where we got callers in, right? And it was me and John sat next to each other. But I realized that is just John's jam. Someone calls in and they say, I have anxiety. I have I can't get over my girlfriend. And that is just John's bread and butter, shifting people's perspectives, grounding people, shifting their perspective, and helping them see things, describing things as they really are. That's John's whole personality stack. And that's not what I produce myself. So we're very complementary there. But of course, he would never go on the radio. He would never create the radio show or find those people to go on the show in the first place. So that's where we complement each other. But that would be a good thing. So I'm sure that would be a good listen. Yeah, I wouldn't be the best person to advise on it. If you came to me and said, how do I grow the business? Then I can help you, right? But I think your question was something slightly different.
Yeah, that's something we'll discuss
Absolutely.
in private.
Happy to help you with that.
Actually, something you just said to me in passing in an Instagram message a couple of weeks ago inspired me to finally launch my ebook, because you texted me and you said, I think you were just sort of checking out my profile ahead of this interview, and you said, is offering those one-on-one coaching sessions the only way that you sort of generate revenue with JawHacks? And I said, I had to think about it, and I was like, yeah, it is. I mean, I have some measly YouTube ad revenue, but all of my revenue is dependent on me being present for these one-on-one chats on Sundays. And I thought that the reason you asked that was almost to say, well, that's probably not the best approach with your business, is to have it depend on you being present with your time in order to make money. And I thought about it for like 2 weeks after that. And I've been working on this ebook for 3 years now, sort of this ultimate guide to mewing, expanders, and jaw surgery, summarizing all of my channel's content from the past 5 years. And I thought, how can I get this out there right now and put it out as a digital product that I can maybe generate some revenue from? And I finally found a way to do that by slowly releasing it, because it's not done yet. So I can't put out the whole thing, and just finishing it is impossible for me because the field keeps changing. Every time I'm ready to publish it, there's a major change in terms of the subject matter that I discuss, in terms of jaw hacking procedures. So I thought, well, why don't I slow release it on Substack on a subscription base? That way I can immediately start generating some subscription-based revenue off of my digital product. And I finally did that earlier this week. By the time this podcast is released, my ebook publication will be probably a few weeks old. And there'll be a link in the description below. But I wanted to thank you. You probably don't even realize that you coached me in a super like Zen way by just asking me a question.
Right. Well, if you understand the personality theory, you are my shadow. I am your shadow. So when we exchange, is pure alchemy happening there, and you'll be extremely receptive to what I do, and I'll be extremely receptive to you also. So it would make perfect sense that for us to exchange is very good, basically.
So like whatever type you are is a good complement for NTPs. Is that what your partner is?
John is INTP, right? And
he's an INTP.
Yeah. So it's not the direct shadow. It's very close, basically, but it's not. It's always slightly different, right? It's going to produce a different flavor. John is more introverted, so me and John are double introverts, and double introversion is going to produce something else than me and you working together. For example, if me and John work together, it's going to be slower, right? Because I'm slower to get everything out there because I'm an introvert. Whereas with you, you're maybe faster to get out there, and we might enable each other more, basically, and activate each other more so. So that's how it just has a slightly different flavor, but yeah, that's how it works. So yeah, you and I, it's good for us to exchange basically in every way, emotionally, thinking, in the sensing as well, and yeah.
So essentially, my type is very philosophical, theoretical. I like to build these sort of mental constructs. I like to build systems. I like to write the book, this ultimate guide where I synthesize all of these ideas into one coherent framework. But then I don't really know how to monetize that.
And you, in a way, you shouldn't go there with yourself. You should have someone else do it for you. And this is what me and John were talking about recently, is when you or people with your thinking, which is very producing your own thoughts, investigative, like you're doing with the JawHacks, it's very interesting. When you try to, in a way, and John can explain this better than I can, but when you try to monetize it, it's not natural for you to do that. It requires some kind of effort that doesn't come naturally to you, and you're very attracted to it. But for me, it's like bread and butter doing that. Like it's zero effort. So it's better. You need to get that from someone else. Now that doesn't necessarily mean your business partner, but maybe being in some kind of community I don't know, I'm just thinking practically here, like a business program where someone has similar personality to me and they can just do all of that thinking for you, basically. It's going to be much better for you for not to go there at all. Like when I have to try and theorize and create a theory and explain theories in depth, it's something that isn't natural. It's not second nature to me. Whereas John or yourself, you do that effortlessly, and you can do that for hours. You know, I think a chat with you and John would be amazing. Whereas for me, it's not effortless to do that, and it requires conscious effort, and it's difficult, and I cannot sustain it for long because that's not my personality. But if we want to talk about business strategy or anything to do with I can also, very, very good at pushing people and come on, let's go to the gym, and that kind of that almost rich piano energy. That's the second nature for me. So that's what I can do well to complement that or expose the ideas and get those ideas out there and stuff like that. Something else that I noticed during the conversation, you naturally derail a lot and you go in 50 million places, right? And my nature is to bring things back basically and refocus. Very focused on one thing. Essentially, that's how my mind works. I can give you some examples. You would be like Alan Watts, same personality as yourself. So if you're familiar with Alan Watts?
I used to listen to Alan Watts all the time. Yeah, he's like a Western Zen Buddhist philosopher.
Yeah, exactly. And Alan Watts is
from the 60s.
Yeah, he's very cool, right? And you have the same personality as Alan Watts, for example, or same personality as, Sam Hyde,
I've
the
heard of Sam
comedian.
Hyde.
Yeah, same personality, you and him. Whereas I'm Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, V for Vendetta in the movie. Those kinds of characters who are very focused on one thing, basically. That's who I am. And that's not you, basically. You have your own strengths there. But we are the shadow, basically, to each other. So it's very good to exchange there. And we both get something from that.
Do you think finding a personality shadow in a romantic partner is important? Is that the best way to kind of screen for a wife?
It's really interesting, and this is something that we have been exploring over the last few years between my friends. And there's no best, right? It's always because there's the personality that you have, but then there's also your life experiences, which is going to shape who you are. That's kind of who you are. And a big part of your life experience is your parents and what personality they have, because that will shape you. So my parents are very hectic also, right? And just to put a term that everyone listening is going to understand, they have that hecticness to them that I have. They don't have comfort, routine, repetition, stability. They have the hecticness all over the place, shotgun. So because I never had a parent or someone around me that was very routine and stable, that made me double, almost like saying I'm double screwed in the hecticness. So my individual need for grounding and calm and stability is so high, let's say higher than another person with the same personality type. So it's important to firstly understand that the type isn't everything, because it can be so influenced by friends and especially family, for growing up for 20 years, living with your parents, or 18 years, or whatever. That's going to have such a dent on you and who you are. And on the flip side of what I said, if you are someone that is naturally very stable and routine and doesn't change much, and is kind of in a state of inertia and stuck in one place, maybe you look at them and say maybe it's a little bit boring, and they have parents who are the same as them, which happens very often, the need for them to expand and go to the gym and do travel and do stuff is much higher than someone else. So that's just to distinguish that you're more than just the type that you're born with. It's also influenced by your environment and your life experiences. So that already means that you can't just judge a potential partner based on the type. Although we did experiment with those things, and there's a few different things that we can observe in people. I've experienced it myself. I would say that when you go with someone very similar to yourself, I find it very not pleasant, and it does not last long, because like I was describing earlier with business, I'm a business-minded person. So if I hang out with business-minded people, we can give each other business tips, but we cannot satisfy the shadow. The psyche yearns for something else, something different, basically.
What it's missing.
Exactly.
It yearns for what it's missing because it knows it's missing that, and it recognizes that, oh man, I would benefit if I had that plugged into me.
Yes, exactly. And it's not something that you're very conscious of, but you kind of feel it. And when you get a glimpse of something that isn't that, you really like it. Essentially, that's how it works. So I've had that experience with girls, and maybe you see on my Instagram, I'm into that whole flashy world and superficiality of stuff, and naturally living in Dubai, all those kinds of things, that attracts those kinds of girls, because girls also have the same personality types as guys, obviously male-female differences. So the kinds of girls that are in my world would be kind of the girls in the clubs, the girls who are more, let's say, superficial and into material possessions. And that is what I am. So I've experienced that when I go with those kinds of girls, and I've had girlfriends and stuff like that. We cannot help each other, basically, which is so. For me personally, my interest is much more in having relationships with the shadow. And it doesn't have to be the full shadow. It can be half shadow. It's kind of there's 4 categories of 4 quadrants of personality types. So one person is half your shadow, half the same. The other is full shadow, like you, if that makes sense. So yeah, just having people that have, so you can satisfy different needs is what I've seen to be what I want. However, you can also say when you go with someone very similar to you, it has a different effect. And it's not necessarily better or worse, it's just what you want or what you prefer. So if you go with someone very similar to you, then you become very independent, because you do not need each other in you cannot fulfill each other's requirements, right? So it can create some kind of tension, but that can also be fun and attractive, and it creates a different kind of relationships where you have to have more people around you, basically, and you acknowledging that you both in the relationship your psyche needs more than each other, basically. Whereas if you go with someone that is the direct opposite of you, or your shadow, like you and I, in a way you need less people, but that also creates then maybe not as good relationships to other people, essentially. But it's very interesting.
Yeah. This idea that to have a long-term enduring relationship, there should be a kind of personality type dependency makes me think of that film, The Phantom Thread, with Daniel Day-Lewis. It was his last film. Have you seen it?
I haven't seen it.
Okay, well, he's a wealthy dressmaker in London in the early 1900s, and he sort of falls for this peasant girl. She's not really a peasant girl; she's a maid, and he's like this fashion magnate in London, but the plot of the movie is that he starts to sort of drift away from her, and then she poisons him so that he becomes more dependent on her. And then he realizes that that's what she's done. She puts these mushrooms in his food, and he gets very sick, and he needs her again because she's there to take care of him physically in bed. And then he heals, and then he starts to drift away from her again. And then the end of the movie, spoiler alert, is he invites her to poison him again because he loves that feeling of needing her and being dependent on her, because it's what keeps them together. It's a kind of fucked up idea. And when you see it, you're like, whoa, that's dark and twisted. He wants her to poison him again and be sick in bed. But it essentially, what the thesis of that is that marriage sort of depends on a kind of dependency between man and woman.
It's not something that I got there. I haven't been there yet with the marriage stuff. John is more he's kind of further along the line with children and stuff like that. But there's so much psychology there, and it's very interesting to see that you kind of have to understand that you need other people, basically, and how that can also affect you in terms of the accepting that the wife, especially, for the guy, it can be kind of possessive there, and accepting that also the wife needs to exchange with other people for her own psychological well-being, essentially, and that can be a challenge also for people to accept. And it's interesting stuff.
Would you generalize that pairing with a similar personality type is good for like a fling, but that pairing with a shadow is better for a long-term relationship?
Yeah, well, it's if you hang out with people who are similar, you have this mutual activities, right? So, for example, if you hang out with, like in my case, if I hang out with a girl that is very similar to me, she's probably going to like doing all this travel stuff that I like, going on a jet ski, supercars, even talking about money to an extent, which I don't do too much with women, or business, which I don't do with women either. But she might be attracted to that, and maybe she wants to be a business somewhat, have her own business and have her own kind of money and stuff like that. So there's going to be more shared interests, but you're going to find them at the same place, right? So if I go to a festival, if I go to Dubai, this is something crazy about Dubai, but Dubai is 80% people with my personality type, INTJs. Wow. 80% of Dubai is like Elon Musk's and Mark Zuckerberg.
You're an INTJ?
Yeah.
How old are you, by the way,
26.
Oscar? Wow, man. Incredible. Jeez.
You're not so old yourself,
I'm 33, but you're very far along, man. Good for you.
It's purely from good friends, honestly, and hanging out with people and also a lot of help from John, and he produces a lot of the ideas that I have and stuff like that. Yeah. Sure. But I was saying 80% of Dubai has my personality type, right? It's called Gamma. Gamma is my quadra, so I'm a Gamma. And it's 80% of Dubai is like Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg and other business gurus. I don't know if you're familiar or people listening might know. Iman Gadzi, same personality type as Elon Musk, as myself. 80% of people have that same personality type. And
is that what Andrew Tate would be too?
He's an ENTJ, so he's the extroverted version of myself. Right, but there's also some of those there as well. So when you have a place in a city where it's just all one type, then there's a lot of everywhere you go that you find each other everywhere, essentially, right? So there's a lot of shared activities. That was the point I was making. It's to say that you're going to find each other in the same places, you hang out in the same kind of venues, etc., right? So there's the shared interest aspect, but the mind yearns for the shadow, essentially. That's what your mind yearns for. Of course, you always need both things, right? That's the wholesomeness that the mind wants to obtain, is a balance of your shadow and your consciousness. So you have to have both, and in order to get the shadow, the only way is to produce it, is to get it externally from other people. You cannot produce those things by yourself, and so you have to have those. Well, not you have to, but you will experience a better life and a better experience with integrating the shadow into your day-to-day life. And it doesn't have to necessarily be in a wife at all. In John's case, he married someone in his quadra. It's kind of hard to explain if you don't understand, but not necessarily similar to him, but in the same sphere, let's say. And so they need shadow. They need me and people like me, both of them, right? So in that case, they have to have that from third people. Otherwise, there's going to be something that's not satisfied in their psyche. They won't develop the same, essentially. So there's no better or worse, and like I said, there's so much more than someone's personality type. There's the life experiences, the values they have, and things like that. But yeah, I'm I can be honest. Like I'm actively looking for a girl that is in the kind of shadow quadra. It's more interesting for me, and it's not something that's easy because people in your quadra, they're not in the places I hang out, right? So if I wanted to find someone more like you, a girl that's, let's say, marriable age, so something like 18 to 21 for me, or 20, or whatever, under 25-year-old girl, similar to you, she's going to be probably in a library,
she'll be at
college.
University for sure.
Yeah, most of them will be in the colleges and stuff like that, and that's not where I go necessarily. And so it's interesting to explore. But yeah, I would like to find that, and it's something that I'm intending to do ASAP.
You're absolutely right about that, man. To find me, the only place you'll ever find me, for example, is at my house.
That's the thing. You guys are cozier and more into your routines, basically, and less all over the place, and not necessarily in the clubs as people in my similarity are. So yeah, that's not that. So that makes it difficult. I think, like you said, libraries, universities. Not even in the gym so much your kinds of people necessarily, whereas
no, we work out at home.
So people like me are always in the gym. All the girls that you see in the gym, 80% of them are going to be similar to me in personality, and that's not what I need myself. But
yeah. Yeah. NTPs like to work out barefoot, just in shorts.
If at all, by the way, John's personality type in particular, the INTP is. It's not gonna often will do nothing, essentially. Only if it's produced by, if they have those people around them that do sports and gym, they'll kind of take them with them.
Yeah. Do you think ENTPs are more likely to work out because they? Why would they? Why do you think I'm motivated to work out more? I mean, I work out every day. I do it because if I don't, I get sick. Actually, that's why I work out every day, because I'm afraid of feeling sick if I don't. I need to keep my body lubricated with flow of fluids and regular cardio and regular weight training, just for my body to feel normal and for me to not get chronic headaches.
You definitely can, and it's not to say you can't, right? John's dad was very sporty, so John's actually very good at sports. So it's like I said, it's a lot about your inputs and your upbringing that influences you there, and also what's in your routine, basically, and that's what will shape the person.
My fitness is 100% routine based. It's just what I do in the morning after I wake up.
Okay.
That's all. It's just plug and chug.
And if you started to travel, maybe that would be heavily affected, basically, and disrupt.
Extremely affected. It just happened when I was at the hospital for my baby being born. I went 4 days without doing any exercise because I was removed from my comfort zone.
Yeah. You have a stronger sense of comfort zone. I have that not at all, basically, consciously. And so that's where it's going to have a different flavor, basically.
Dude, that's incredible. Yeah, I'm building this house. Right now, I'm living with my parents as I'm building this house. I'm actually terrified about moving to the new house. And it's 1 mile up the road. And I'm like, I'm like, fuck, do I want to be in this new building? Do I want to be in this different
Yeah,
place
yeah, yeah.
alone? I mean, it's way bigger. It's way nicer than where I mean, right now I'm in a in-law apartment on the first floor of this house, you know, and it's going to be an objective upgrade to move to this house, but I'm actually terrified and I'm not really looking forward to it. It's just something I have to
Right,
do.
right. Yeah, I wouldn't. I would be excited there, and but of course, I would on the flip side, unconsciously, I would also long for some kind of routine there. So there's a
Right.
shadow part of you that is actually wanting to do those things and go and move around and travel and stuff, but it maybe doesn't come
Yeah,
so
yeah,
natural
yeah.
for you to want those things basically. And that's why if you hang out with
Dude,
someone like myself, then I would basically take you with me. Essentially, that's how it would be.
it's so weird, man. Hanging out with you and your friends gives me so much perspective on my life because if you think about the way I did live, I actually traveled in a converted Sprinter van for a long
Mhm.
time. And that was my way of being out in the world and traveling, but tethered to a comfort zone. I had this comfort zone van that was my little secret space, but I took it into cities and traveled with
That's
it.
funny. Yeah, yeah. I wouldn't necessarily have that, but yeah, that's funny.
No, you would just bounce around from hostel to hostel, stay in hotels,
More
right?
like
Be
that,
out.
basically. But it's important to know I would suffer as a result, but it just wouldn't be conscious. And so, if we were hanging out, for example, this is the alchemy where you would say maybe we should stay here another night. You know, maybe we should not move, basically, and there it'd
Right,
be kind of
right, right.
complementary, and yeah, that would be you'd feel the effects more, so you would propose something else essentially, where I would just keep going, and then it's a good example is like the classic ENTJ, right? Is someone that pushes. Andrew Tate, he's going to die probably when he's like 60 years old, realistically. But he had a lot of vitality to his life, right? So he pushes. He says, "Fuck how I feel. Fuck comfort. Fuck my cozy caravan. Fuck all anything cozy. Fuck all of that shit. Fuck coziness." Right? That's what you get, right? There's a really good video where Andrew reveals his personality type, and I'll send it to you in a moment. But he says, I don't know what comfort is. I've never been comfortable in my whole life. That's people that have that comfort that you're talking about in the unconscious. It's not something conscious that they value necessarily. And so what happens when you do that is you're going to live a very vital life, and it's going to be all over the place and maybe very successful, like Tate might be perceived as. But you eventually you burn out and you die basically just from drinking 14 cups of coffee every day, as he says he does, or whatever, right? Because he has no sense
Yeah,
of
yeah, and smokes 3
right, no
cigars.
sense of comfort, no sense of how he really feels, and so that's going to have a different effect on your life. Whereas if he had someone that was much more comfortable in his life and slowed him down a lot, he might be more balanced there. So it's not to say that's better or worse. It's just it has a different effect when you have those people around you.
Maybe that's why he's so attached to his brother. His brother seems a lot more subdued.
They're similar. His brother's more
Oh, okay.
grounded, I would say, more a bit more grounded, but they're actually in the same quadrant, which is interesting. So
Hmm.
they don't they would struggle to help each other, I would say, and they need external they need external people, which is interestingly enough, I don't think they would get that because I think the kind of girls that they would get would be mostly similar to them, basically attracted to the mansions, the cars, and the money, like myself. They're basically marrying the female version of themselves or myself, and that wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
produce that cozy comfort that I think they would really appreciate and enjoy, basically. So
Right,
in
right.
turn, the effect that it has is that they might live this very vital life, but they will crash and burn and probably die younger as a result. Essentially, in Tate's case, I'm just thinking with the coffees and stuff like that. But it's not to say it's better or
Yeah,
worse. It is what it is, you know, and it's always just produces different effects, and then you can decide if you want those effects or not.
yeah. David Goggins would be another example, maybe, of an
He's
ENTJ.
an ISTP actually. It's funny that you bring him up.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah. So David Goggins is an ISTP, which is also someone that really yearns for comfort, and he produces none of the comfort by him. When I say he has no sense of coziness, but he really wants that coziness, and you just look at him and you say, "Relax, just chill." Basically, let's stay still, you know. And it's not the impression you get, right? He's go 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 nonstop. Who's going to carry the boats? Who's going to carry the logs? And it's like, well, who's gonna carry David? Who's gonna carry David Goggins? You know, it's actually he needs to slow down and be comfortable and chill, basically. And he would
yeah,
really
yeah.
appreciate having that in his life, basically. And
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
that's the That's the personality type there, basically.
Wow, man. So
And
insightful.
what's
So
very
insightful.
interesting is that Arjunus, the guy I was talking about, he kind of made a lot of the formulas and the lab work for raw meat as a way of healing people with serious problems. He had the same personality type as David Goggins. So when you read Arjunus's book, and this is when my friends and I have kind of taken that and transformed it into something else, there is no sense of comfort there. It's like he really wanted the comfort, but there is nothing in his book that is comfortable. It's like very non-stop, persistent. Eat this. 15 minutes later, do this. 26 minutes later, do this. Put 7% of your juice as cilantro, and all of this autism and overload of like, just this is not comfortable, because that's his personality type, and that reflected in his work. And so it would take someone like John, who has a big sense of comfort. He reads Arjunus's work and then transforms it into something more comfortable, basically. You see what I mean? So it's very interesting that when we know Arjunus's personality type, that he was the same as David Goggins, and he just needed to chill with his routine, and he needed someone to make it comfortable and cozy. And that's part of the work that my friends and I, especially my friends who have a lot of sense of coziness to them, have produced, basically. And in terms of making things taste nice and chilling out a little bit, and not being so full on as David Goggins can be perceived as. And
How important is it for a young person to know their type, and is that something you offer as part of your coaching program?
It's definitely part of the service. It's not necessarily important as it is to actually get people and have good friends around you, basically. That's the main thing that it can do for you. But it can be interesting to explore. I'd say that we have, like, my friends and I, we have like an autistic understanding of typology that no one is gonna get unless they spend a lot of time with us and spend many years studying. So it's difficult for someone to learn the things that we know. It's very autistic. So it would only.
Do you guys think you're on are you guys the absolute bleeding edge of personality typing on the planet right now?
There's nothing by comparison, nothing whatsoever comes close to it. But this isn't me, right? Like I'm not someone that produces theories. That's John's personality type. So this is heavily John and his art of work, his work, basically his work of art. So, but there's nothing that comes close to it. It's very, very interesting. Now you can, and John isn't someone that cares to make it into a business. He doesn't care about having the ideas out there. In a way, it's kind of esoteric, so it's not meant to be understood by anyone. That's kind of John's style of thinking. But someone like me, who is business oriented, will come along and essentially bastardize the theory and say, let's take this typology theory and let's make it into an AI software and da 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 da. John would never do that. He does not care in the slightest. Right. And maybe you can resonate with that, of like, you just want to know the thing for the thing itself and understanding how it works, right? And
yes, until I had expenses.
Right. And then you maybe get caught up in life itself, and then you have things to do, right? But if you had all the money in the world, it's not to say you would do JawHacks in your investigative way, but it wouldn't necessarily change you suddenly if you had all the money in the world. It would be very similar. That's what I'm saying. Yeah, exactly. And John is the same. If I gave him $1 billion, he wouldn't change. He would doing the same investigation, the same theory producing around typology, same investigative work, and that's it. So that's kind of how it works essentially. But there's no one who has anywhere close to the understanding. And I would say the most interesting thing that distinguishes what we know from everyone else is understanding the shadow, basically, as the request. It's kind of the request theory, essentially, that we all request our shadow, our unconscious personality functions, and no one has ever understood that. And that is really the most game-changing piece of information ever, essentially. Yeah, it's really fascinating. But it's super autistic, but you would be very capable of learning it if you were interested in doing that. But it's very cool, and it's very useful as a communication tool and understanding also, and respecting other people and valuing everyone. Because then you see, I used to think my grandma was dumb and boring, and she's super cozy. Like, that's her number one thing. As a way, I'm just describing it in a way that everyone will understand. She's extremely cozy. Like, cozy 101, archetypal grandma, stay at home, same apartment for 80 years, same routine for 80 years, never changed anything, hoards all of her stuff and da da da. That's my grandma, right? And I previously could look at her and say, oh, she's kind of just dumb, routine old lady, right? You could judge it negatively as that. But now I can see so cozy, relaxing, grounded, doesn't get caught up in the world. She's just there in her room doing her thing, and that's really nice, actually. And when I'm with my grandma now, I can really chill, basically. I'm relaxed because she is the least hectic person on the planet because she's so cozy. And I'm zero cozy, right? So I need coziness from other people to make me more grounded.
Right.
So yeah, so through the understanding, then it kind of it just describes what you would feel otherwise. And when you describe something and you feel like you understand it better, you can kind of use it in a different way. So yeah, that's why it's interesting for sure.
It makes me think about, I'm trying to find a business partner to launch this breastfeeding product. It's a wearable breastfeeding product. I'm going to call it the rack. It's basically something that a man could wear to, it's going to have a very biomimicking nipple that creates the same suckling action in a baby that produces good facial structure that an actual human breast does. And I have the ideas, I have the vision, I have the marketing platform, but I need a partner who can take the idea and turn it into a prototype and then turn it into a manufacturing process and then get me something that I can actually put out to market. And I'm trying to make sure that I don't get associated with another business partner who's all idea. I need action because I have the idea.
That doesn't exist already? That's quite an interesting...
No,
Really?
Doesn't exist at all. Yeah.
That's fascinating. You would think that exists.
You would think, but people really don't value the importance of like a slow, deliberate kind of bottle nipple that causes the baby to suckle the way that an actual human breast does. Baby bottles, all of them, without exception, are very, very different than the actual human breast and produce very different facial structure.
Very interesting. And does that exist for in bottle form? Because you were saying your specific form is the...
No, it does not exist in bottle form.
So you're saying to revolutionize the baby milking device, essentially.
Yes, to revolutionize it into something that's natural.
That's interesting.
So that, dude, it's so important.
Yeah.
It's so important.
Interesting. That would be. I mean, to be honest, like that sounds interesting. I would be open to chatting about it. I could maybe know some people that do e-commerce and stuff like that. That could be interesting.
Okay. Yeah, and I think, but most important is finding a partner who is my shadow.
Yeah. That's the way it's gonna. That you would naturally do that anyway, even if you never understood anything that I was saying or heard about it. Naturally, you would kind of feel like you want that already. Basically, you're going to want someone that has that business mind. So, I guess you can use the typology as a qualification tool as well if you wanted to as well. But that it would happen naturally anyway. It's a process that would happen naturally.
Well, Oscar, we're at 2 hours.
We could go forever for like.
I know, and I want to respect your time, and I appreciate you coming on. Where can people find you if they want to talk to you more?
Yeah, it's been a really great chat. I really enjoyed it. It was I didn't know exactly what we were going to chat about, but yeah, I liked where it went. We went into many different things, and that's a nice listening experience. The best place is on my Instagram. I've started to post more on YouTube now. So if you just type in Oscarvore, that's like my name all in one word. That's my kind of online name. That's where you'll find some stuff that I post there. And on my Instagram, I'm the most active day to day, posting stories and stuff like that, Q&As and stuff like that. So yeah, those two places is the best.
You're open to taking on new clients?
Absolutely. If someone's interested and they have I'd say it's most, if someone has a specific health problem that they would like to fix, that would be the best case fit. Or if someone's just generally curious, then it would make sense if they have the financial means. But usually the motivation would be around fixing a specific problem. But happy to help anyone that says they come from the JawCast podcast or anything.
Cool. Yeah, a lot of my listeners do have health problems. Most of them are under the impression that their health problems are related to an undersized airway, sleep disordered breathing, sleep apnea. But one thing I've always taught is that fixing your airway can be an important step toward becoming healthy, but it's never really enough, and that you kind of have to address every aspect of health, physical, mental, nutritional, airway related, in order to really live an optimal, healthy life. And perhaps where you might fit into that is for people who are addressing the, facial structure component, but also maybe have a really shitty diet, and they kind of know that. Maybe they feel like, oh, my diet could use a lot of refinement. My mental health could use a lot of refinement. I have a lot of trauma to sort of unpack related to the health problems, perhaps related to the airway that I've had my whole life. Maybe you could be a nice supplemental resource to JawHacks for someone who's on a complete, self-improvement journey.
Absolutely, yeah. Especially if you feel like you're lacking in energy levels, if you're lacking in having some negative digestion symptoms, if you feel like you have those, having gas is really not normal. Certainly, having gas often is really not a good sign. It's a sign that the nutritional changes need to happen. If you have acne, of course, any kind of psoriasis is really cured. Allergies, especially, it's really cured through nutrition, and I've done that hundreds of times with people. So those kinds of ailments would be things that I could definitely help someone with, and I can show results that have helped people to do those things in a matter of weeks. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, allergies I think is a great one to kind of reach my audience, because a lot of my audience has, like I said, clogged airways, especially clogged nasal airways, and they know that when it's allergy season, they get especially flared up. But maybe they just have this underlying inflammation related to their diet, and if they could clean that out and reduce inflammation, that their undersized nasal airway might not be so burdensome.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if anyone's taking allergy medication, you can really come off of that in a matter of weeks. I have some amazing testimonials of someone that was taking allergy medication their whole life, and if they didn't, they felt like they were having instant flus and massive sneezing symptoms and stuff. And yeah, I've had many such cases where they were able to completely hard stop the medication and come off of those medications. They didn't feel like they needed it anymore. So that would be a very case that I can help someone with, absolutely. If they were wanting to and open-minded, then absolutely.
Awesome, Oscar. I'll put your links in the description of the video. And once again, thank you for your time, and let's keep in touch, okay? I consider you a friend.
Absolutely, man. I'm actually moving to the US. Well, I'm for a few months at least, so it'd be cool to hang out at some point.
Oh, where at?
Well, first I'm going to Miami. First I'm going to into Miami. I'm going to check it out, see if it's a good place. Otherwise, I like California already, so I know I like it there. I just want to see how it is in Florida, and then I'll eventually move there. We also want to move. John and I want to buy a house and stuff in one of those two places. But yeah, we'll see how it is in Miami. I'm not sure how the Latino lifestyle is for myself, but we'll see.
I think you'll love Miami. There's really not much not to love in Miami. It's an amazing place. California is a little bit more wonky politically.
That's true.
There's a lot more political uncertainty in California. One day you're amazingly free in this perfect climate, and then the next day it's like masks and everything gets shut down, and all the restaurants in LA are closed,
right,
and you can't go do this and that. So I would say certainly Florida is a lot more predictably awesome. But obviously, Southern California is probably the most amazing place in the world. I lived there for a little while. San Diego is a very underrated city.
Yeah, we were staying in Hollywood Hills area, and it was really beautiful. Like the pure vibes, the weather, nice wide roads, palm trees. It was really, I felt like amazing there.
Yeah, I'm sure you did, man, with your type in Hollywood.
Yeah, it really was like, this is a life I could live forever, I think. Yeah,
hell yeah.
Malibu also was incredible.
Oh, of course, man. All right, well, good. Well, I hope to meet you someday.
Should, man. We can
and good stuff. All right, Oscar,
take care,
care,
man. Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye.